So I have Ryan O'Reilly getting paid $6 million for 5 years going back to St. Louis.
You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah!
Good evening and welcome to episode 176 of the podcast. Just Melbs and Cody for this one. Abrams is tied up for this one. So Chad, just you and I, and we're coming off a great weekend, as it always is, with our ball hockey tournament, formerly known as the Pepsi Cup, now the Boys in the Booth Ball Hockey Classic. What a great weekend that was. Congrats again to our good pal Adam James and the No Name Nailers on winning their second title in the last 3 years. So congrats to them. What a great weekend that was. You're back in Toronto now. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Great weekend for sure. I feel like the days leading up to that weekend are the most fun of the summer because there's so much buzz around that tournament and everybody thinks they can win, and then the tournament comes and you're playing and it's equally as fun as well. And then all of a sudden the tournament's over. And if you didn't win, then you're thinking to yourself, damn, it's over. I got to wait till next year. And that was the situation for both you and I and Casey, who was on my team. We didn't get the job done. Corey's team, who you were playing for, didn't get the job done. That's 10 straight years for Corey without a trophy. 2013 was the last time he won it. So I think actually it's 12 tournaments, but the 10th straight year. So no good for him, no good for us. We got those beautiful rings and not a single member of the Boys in the Booth got to wear them. So that was a bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. It's all in good fun. There's a bit of a controversial call in the finals that we had to have a conversation about amongst the captains. I'm sure I'm going to hear about that one for a long time coming because it was a bit of a turning point in the game, even though it was 1-1 after the first period. But yeah, all in all, it was a fantastic weekend. Always love it. And for me, the highlight was Adam and some other guys on his team, Nick, Cam, etc., taking the cup out to the bar because that was just like for me watching that cup that I made, 12 years ago or whatever, 11 years ago, I think, seeing that just being paraded around inside the Keystorm and the bar and people wanting to take pictures and stuff as if it's the Stanley Cup. I just think it's so funny. So what a great weekend. And for me, that was one of the highlights because I wasn't able to win like I did last year. But yeah, you mentioned it too. I'm back in Toronto, so things are going well there. It's nice to be home, sleep in my own bed, see Paige, etc. So yeah, just back into the swing of things. And then this coming weekend is going to be another big one for the boys. I know you have the regatta and that concert, and I've got some festivities planned for Canada Day as well. So the boys are busy, and that's actually the reason why it's just the two of us, because Casey is a busy boy tonight as well, doing something on a boat somewhere and having some fun. But yeah, overall, boys are doing well, and we're ready to talk about some UFAs.
Yeah, definitely. And before we get into all that, a couple of big trades that we saw today. Obviously, as we're recording this on Tuesday night, this will be out on Wednesday, the same day as the NHL draft. And by the way, you can head over to boysinthebooth.com or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can listen to our mock draft episode that we did last week ahead of the NHL draft, which again is on Wednesday night when this podcast will be released on Wednesday. So yeah, a couple of big trades today. There's been a lot of activity. Pierre-Luc Dubois goes to the LA Kings, as that was rumored, and gets a long-term extension right away. 8 years, $8.5 million AAV. Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, Gabe Vilardi, who had a nice breakout season with the Kings this year, and a second rounder go to the Winnipeg Jets. So pretty good deal there for both sides. It'll be interesting to see how the return shakes out for Winnipeg. And then the deal between Calgary and the New Jersey Devils. We knew that Tyler Toffoli wasn't going to re-sign in Calgary, as others won't be as well, we expect. So it's Yegor Sharangovich, the 25-year-old forward, and a draft pick going to the Calgary Flames in exchange for Tyler Toffoli. So he gets to go to a good young team on the rise, and Casey's not with us for this one, but I'm sure he's pretty excited about that. So a couple of big deals, and oh man, you gotta love the off season. It's just gonna keep getting busier with all kinds of activity around the draft and after, and going into free agency on July 1st. So exciting times for sure.
Definitely. And personally, I hope Brad Treliving is cooking something up before the draft, because there are a lot of big decisions to make in Toronto, and some good players are being snatched up via trade already. Not saying that PLD or even Toffoli was linked to the Leafs at all, because I don't think either of them were. But, you know, it's just an indication that the offseason is well underway. The draft is coming up tomorrow, and like things are going to start moving really quickly. So I'm just hoping that the newest GM of the Maple Leafs is able to get some work done, and maybe has some tricks up his sleeve as well.
Well, knowing Brad Treliving and how he is as a GM and his track record and all that, he's one of those guys that calls on everybody. So you definitely know that he's cooking something or multiple things behind the scenes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Treliving and your Toronto Maple Leafs. So, Chad, let's get into this one. Episode 176. We're going to talk about the top 5 unrestricted free agents heading into the opening day of free agency on Canada Day, July 1st. So it's a quick turnaround. We've got the draft on Wednesday night, and then a couple of days after, it's the opening day of free agency. So it's exciting times ahead. So what we've done is we've identified the top 5 UFAs, and we're going to go through and predict their next contracts and where they're going to sign. And what we've actually done, and you can do this as well if you want, it's a really fun exercise, a challenging one, I will say, but you can go to Cap Friendly, a great resource, and you can actually do a little armchair GM and make some signings, trades, all of that. And so that's what I did. I know that you were looking at that earlier as well, and so with these top 5 UFAs, tried to sign them to teams that I thought made sense, and also made sense for these clubs under the salary cap, which is going to be a challenge, as we know, because the cap is only going up by $1 million. $83.5 million is what the salary cap will be per team heading into the 23-24 season. So, Chad, let's start with our number 1 UFA, and I think it's a pretty easy choice for first on our list, and that's Ivan Barbashev, now a 2-time Stanley Cup champion with the St. Louis Blues and now the Vegas Golden Knights. He fit like a glove in Vegas. What a playoff run that he had. And we'll start with Barbashev. So let's get your contract prediction for the Russian forward.
Yeah, so if I can figure out how to make this not blur me, that would be great. I'm sure the YouTube viewers are going nuts about this. Hello, no more blurriness, please, Mr. Camera. But yeah, we'll start with Ivan Barbashev, the 27-year-old. The highest point total he's ever had is 60 in 81 games played. He had 45 in 82 this year, and as we all know, he's a Cup champ as well. So that is an important factor to consider, being a Cup champion, especially because of his playoff run as well. He had 18 points in 22 games played in these playoffs, and like we mentioned it, I think it was a few episodes ago, while we were still talking about the playoffs, and I said, I'm pretty sure this guy's deal is up, and if that's the case, which it is, he's going to get paid, and that's what I think is going to happen. I think a team is probably going to overpay him given his track record of production, but here's the deal. I think he could go to a team like Carolina for a nice simple 5x5 deal. You might think he could get more than that. You might think he could get a little bit less. But I think given the market, how it is right now, pretty thin, by the way, for UFAs. Yes. I think that Barbashev, atop the list, could get a nice little 5x5 deal in Carolina. I thought it made sense in Carolina because they're a team who, every year they've been really good in the regular season, and in the playoffs they haven't been able to get over the hump. And whether you think that's because of a lack of true superstars or what it is, or maybe they're soft or whatever, Ivan Barbashev, I think, would fix that. He's a guy who can produce in the playoffs like we saw just this year, and he's a guy who brings that different element that I don't think Carolina has a lot of. Or at least if they have a guy who has that element, I'm talking about that grit, the guy who battles like crazy and is tough to play against. It's not from their top guys like Aho, Svechnikov, Necas even. So I think he would be a great fit in Carolina if they decide that that's the way they want to go. The only reason I think it maybe wouldn't work out in Carolina is that they're a team known for not overpaying players. So if the bidding gets out of control, I would expect them to be out. But that's my prediction. What do you think of that one, Harp?
I like it, man. Carolina definitely is a team that struggles offensively. We've talked about that before, and I think part of it is, this is not anything against Rod Brindamore. He's a phenomenal coach, but I just think that they play a system that is so heavily focused on defense and a lot of dump and chase and forecheck, and they have to work so hard to score goals. And so I think a guy like Barbashev, who's got that offensive talent, he's only 27 years old, coming off the playoff run that he just had. That would be a dream of a first line, I think, of Barbashev with Svechnikov and Sebastian Aho in Carolina. I think that would be incredible. So I could see it for sure, and that would be a very interesting negotiation because, as we know, Carolina sets a price, and they tend not to go very far above their desired price for a player. So I could see it for sure.
That's right. And I thought also, too, this is relevant. I don't know what they're going to do with Max Pacioretty or what his deal will even look like because he is also a free agent. So if they choose not to bring him back, they would have the space to bring in a guy like Barbashev. But then, of course, if they choose to bring him back, even if it's for, $2-3 million on a 1-year deal, because, he didn't play all last year, so you don't really know where he's at or if he is going to play. But that would complicate things. So everything is all up in the air right now. But I think the fit, the team fit, I think, makes a lot of sense. And what I wanted to say, too, you're talking about the cap-friendly armchair GM. That's a bit complicated as well right now because, as we know, so much can change in terms of cap space, especially on a day like tomorrow at the draft. So, even what we're talking about right now, like if Cap Friendly shows a team has $4.5 million, well, that could be 10 tomorrow, or that could be 0 tomorrow. So it's all very up in the air, and especially this early in the offseason, it is a bit difficult to predict where that cap space is going to be for each team, but it at least gives us a ballpark. So I wanted to mention that as well because as I went through Cap Friendly and was looking through the teams, I tried to do that. I tried to fit it under the cap, which made a lot of sense at the time. But then also you have to consider that it's just so variable at this point in the off season. So
it is. It's such a difficult exercise to do and such a difficult thing to try and predict. But so going to me now with Barbashev, I've got him staying with the Vegas Golden Knights. Surprise, surprise. And you've got 5 times 5. I've got him just under $5 million. I've got him staying in Vegas with a nice 4.9, his jersey number 49, so that would be nice, times 4 years. So I think that, with the price a little lower, given that Vegas just won the Stanley Cup, and they've, as of right now, they've only got around $8.5 million in cap space. I think that they would be able to talk Barbashev into a nice deal like that, 4.9 times 4 years. years, and then, afterwards he would only be 30 years old and potentially could cash in on another deal either with Vegas or another team. So that's what I've got for Barbashev. And, it allows Vegas to also re-sign Adin Hill to that rumored 4.9 times 2 years that we've seen reported by Elliot Friedman. So you'd be able to take care of that as well. And just as a roster move that they can make to free up a little bit of space to bring both of those guys back, because Vegas is in a nice spot for next year. They've got the majority of that roster all signed, all under contract and back for next year to potentially go on a big run. So if they want to send out a guy like William Carrier, he makes $1.4 million for another year. You could probably get a decent return for a good bottom six forward like that. So I had Carrier traded to the St. Louis Blues, where he was drafted for a third round pick, let's say, just to make it all work financially. So that's what I have. Barbashev staying in Vegas, $4.9 million times 4 years. What do you think?
I could see that happening as long as they can make it fit with both guys under the cap, because like you mentioned, that 4.9 deal for Adin Hill we think is as good as done. Like it's probably ready to go, and I don't know if I agree with that deal. I think that's a bit of an overpay, and even Barbashev at 4.9 or 5 million, I think that could also be an overpay depending on what his regular season production is. But Vegas, they're able to keep the guys they want, and they're able to get rid of the guys that they don't, and they seem to do it every year, and they're ruthless about it. So even if one of those deals doesn't work out, I could see them moving on from a player like Barbashev or Hill if those deals don't work out. But yeah, it's all about the cap situation. If they can fit them both under, it would make a lot of sense, and I'm sure he would love to return to Vegas, where he just won the Cup. And now, a word from our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by Liquid IV. Whether you're staying active or nursing a hangover, Liquid IV has you covered. Just one stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. It contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. It's made with premium ingredients, it's non-GMO, and it's free from gluten, dairy, and soy. There are plenty of awesome flavors, but my personal favorite right now is lemon lime. So get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code boys_in_the_booth at checkout. That's 20% off anything in the store when you order using the promo code boys_in_the_booth at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today with Liquid IV. This podcast is also sponsored by the best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. Plus, Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first ticket purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll move on to the number 2 UFA on our list out of our top 5, and that's Dmitry Orlov, the Russian defenseman. Went from Washington to the Boston Bruins at the trade deadline, along with Garnet Hathaway, and just like Barbashev with Vegas, Orlov fit like a glove with the Boston Bruins. Even though they unfortunately lost in round 1 to the Florida Panthers, as we know, but Orlov was a good player there. I don't think he re-signs with the Boston Bruins, though. We'll get to that in a minute. But where do you see Dmitry Orlov ending up, and is it back in Washington?
Well, so unlike Ivan Barbashev, I don't think that Dmitry Orlov will be able to re-sign in Boston like you think Barbashev will be able to in Vegas. There's just no way Boston's able to afford it. Washington's an interesting case. I thought about that a lot, but I kind of wanted to go off the board for this one. But before I give you the team and contract prediction, I'll just read a couple of stats to tell you why he's so valuable. He played the most minutes of any player on the UFA list this year. So any player whose contract is up, he played the most at about 22 minutes a night. So consistent top pair or top 4 minutes on two pretty good teams. I know Washington didn't finish very highly this year, but it's still a pretty good team. They just had some injury trouble and they're in a bit of a retool situation. But Boston, that's a great team, and he still played top 4 minutes for them as well. He's been a remarkably consistent, around 30-point player from the back end, driving a little bit of offense from back there, which is great to have. Makes a great first pass and is responsible in his own end as well. He did have 17 points in 23 games with Boston going into the playoffs after the trade deadline, which was phenomenal in my opinion. He was kind of carrying some of the offense on the back end there, along with a guy like Hampus Lindholm, who, by the way, did you see that he finished in the top 6, I want to say, in Norris voting? Lindholm, you see that?
Yeah, I sure did. Rasmus Dahlin was 8th in voting.
That was wild to me. Dahlin was the front runner almost for half a season and then finished 8th. But anyway, so Orlov's a hell of a player. He's coming off of a deal that paid him $5.1 for 6 straight years. I think he'll get a little bit of a raise on that. My prediction is $6 million times 5 years in Florida. And I think Florida makes sense because that's a team who I think is restructuring their blue line. We know that they give up a ton of scoring chances against, and they're going to be losing a guy like Radko Gudas in the offseason because I don't think they really want to pay him what another team will in UFA. I think Gudas is going to get overpaid, and I think Florida knows that, and they're probably happy to see him walk. I could be totally wrong. I know they like the player, but I think someone will give him probably too much money, like Nick Leddy money, maybe like a 4x4 or something. I could see happen. It, man. Couldn't you?
Yeah, I could see it too. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I've got him going to Florida. I think it makes a ton of sense. Plays the left side, can move the puck, can create some offense, take the burden off of a guy like Aaron Ekblad. And we forget too, they don't have Mackenzie Weegar anymore, and their back end is pretty thin. If they didn't have Bobrovsky in the playoffs, I don't know where they would be because that back end gives up a ton. So I think Orlov just makes a ton of sense there. What do you think?
I do think it makes a ton of sense as well. We know that Florida is going to be looking to add, especially to their depth on the blue line. But the only thing I wonder about is if it works financially for them in the long run, because let's not forget that in a year from now, they're going to need to give new extensions to guys like Brandon Montour and Gustav Forsling, who I think they absolutely want to keep, and as they should. I mean, those are two important defensemen to them. I mean, my goodness, Montour had 73 points this season. You could have made a case for him to win the Norris Trophy, and he had a really good playoffs as well. But in terms of the fit and adding to that blue line, I think a guy like Orlov would be perfect.
Well, and the reason I think it could work financially is that, this season at times, I know there was one point where they had to keep Duclair out of games when, by all accounts, he was healthy because the salary cap didn't work. I don't think there's a chance they go into next year having to hold guys out on LTIR because the salary cap doesn't work. I think they figure it out up front and restructure a bit, and then if they do that and are able to sign Orlov for, what did I say, 6x6, 6x5, whatever it is, that top 4 all of a sudden looks pretty good and is pretty damn competitive amongst contending teams. So I think the fit is there. I think that they could swindle it financially if they wanted to. It'll all kind of depend what happens at the draft.
Yeah, definitely. So talking about Orlov, I kind of have an off-the-board pick for him as well. I don't have him going back to the Washington Capitals because, as we know, I think that the negotiations kind of fell off between Orlov and the Caps, and I'm sure he'd love to go back to Washington. He's expressed that, but I think term was the issue there. But I mean, after the season that he had and the playoffs. I think that there will be a lot of potential suitors that will give him that term that he wants. So I've kind of got a bit of an off the board pick. I've got him going to the Dallas Stars on a deal around $5.5 million times 5 years. So about $500,000 short compared to your deal there, Chad. So now this would be more of a challenge financially for the Dallas Stars. The only way that I could see this happening, and Dallas would have to do it in a couple of days before the buyout window closes, but I think they would have to buy out a guy like Ryan Suter. He's got 2 years left at $3.65 million, and we saw that he really struggled in the playoffs, and I just think that because he struggled so much, Dallas just didn't have a lot on the back end, and I think that hurt them, especially against the Vegas Golden Knights in that Western Conference Finals, because that blue line on the Golden Knights was just unbelievable. So I think if Dallas can buy out Suter in the next couple of days, and I mean it's a huge hypothetical, but it's something that's been out there. If they can also move on from a guy like Colin Miller, who only has a year left on his contract at just under $2 million, around 1.85. If they can send him to a team like Chicago, for example, who cap space is not an issue, and it gives them a player that can help them a little bit, they could make this work with Dmitry Orlov. And then you've got a guy who can play with Heiskanen. You elevate Thomas Harley in the lineup as well. He maybe becomes a top 4 guy, and then that improves your blue line, because I do feel that, I think all of us feel that Dallas is very much in that championship window with the group that they have. So, I've got Orlov to the Stars, kind of an off the board pick, but I've got him going there, $5.5 million times 5 years.
Yeah, I could see that happening, and I like the fit too, but like you said, there are a few things that have to happen for the money to work there. And I think they also want to try to keep Max Domi. So it depends what his number comes in at as well.
That's true.
So there's a lot to consider, but Domi was really good for them down the stretch and in the playoffs. So I think that's a player they like and want to keep. And he even tweeted, I think it was yesterday or whenever the awards were, last night, I guess. Yeah. And he said, it's crazy how Heiskanen wasn't in the top 3 in Norris Trophy voting, because he thinks he's that good, and he is, and he carries that back end. And that's a little bit of the problem. You need a bit more there, which is kind of crazy because, just a few years ago, when you looked at that blue line, you thought, wow, that's pretty strong, but you've got some players aging. Ryan Suter, I thought at the time after the buyout, was a great pickup. But again, he's a bit of an older guy. And even though he doesn't make the crazy money he once was in Minnesota, it's still money that could be used elsewhere better. And if that's on Dmitry Orlov, they get better immediately. I just don't know if the money works. We'll have to see.
Yeah, exactly. And just as a side note for the Stars, I wonder if maybe Oliver Ekman-Larsson could be a fit there. The cost would be a lot cheaper than Dmitry Orlov, and as we know, OEL is a free agent after being bought out by the Vancouver Canucks, so maybe that could be an option. They've certainly gone down that road before, as we mentioned with Suter, where a good defenseman gets bought out and then becomes available, so maybe they go down that route again. And you're right, Max Domi certainly could sign an extension there. I don't think it's a guarantee that he's returning to Chicago. That's certainly been out there. He certainly liked playing there, but he did fit really well with the Dallas Stars. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Just before we wrap up here on the Stars and Orlov, what if the Stars circle back to a guy like Klingberg now that he's not perceived to be worth as much money as he was a couple years ago?
That's true too.
And they know the guy, it's a good fit. I mean, the reason that they traded him out or the reason that he wasn't kept in Dallas was because he wanted a long-term deal and Dallas didn't feel like it was worth it. Maybe they circle back and say, okay, you've kind of bounced around the league a little bit now. And I mean, he went to Anaheim and didn't have a very good year, but maybe they say, listen, maybe you're not the $7 million player. Maybe you're a $5 million player for, 3 years or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out here right now. But Klingberg's another guy who's up this year. It's been rumored that he'll go to another, dumpster team, and then they'll just flip him at the deadline for picks, similar to what we thought would happen last year, and similar actually to a Max Domi, which did happen last year. So just throwing something out there. I could maybe see that working if the Orlov thing falls through.
Yeah, no, I could see that as well. All right, number 3 on our list, we have Ryan O'Reilly, who, of course, was picked up by your Toronto Maple Leafs at the deadline, along with Noel Acciari in a deal with the St. Louis Blues. And O'Reilly was a big factor. His nickname, by the way, is Factor, and so he played great for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he's a guy that's getting older. The offensive production has certainly fallen off a little bit, but I think on a contending team or a team looking to take the next step and get into the postseason, he could be the perfect third-line center, I think, in my opinion. Big fan of this player and just such a reliable veteran. So he's number 3 on our list. What is happening with Ryan O'Reilly, and is he returning to the Maple Leafs, Chad?
Yeah, so the 32-year-old Ryan O'Reilly, you said you were a little bit worried about the production. For me, I'm less worried about the production and a little bit more worried about the foot speed, especially if he's going to be a guy who keeps playing down the middle, whether it's in the top 6 or the bottom 6 for a team. Just because when he played in Toronto and watching him every game, he was able to get on the scoreboard, especially on the power play, just being a guy out front of the net. The problems came when the puck went the other way. And even though he's a great defensive center and is most of the time in the right position, when he's out of position, you know it, because he's not going to get to that right position for a while because his foot speed has declined so much. But I mentioned that the production was still there. He had 9 points in 11 playoff games with Toronto, and he has 65 points in 75 playoff games in his career. So he's still able to put up points. Just like I said, the foot speed is something I'm a little bit concerned with. However, I will say that I think he is still the current best centerman on the market right now in UFAs, anyways, among UFAs. I don't know if there's a better one out there. Even a guy like Jonathan Toews, I don't think he is close to what Ryan O'Reilly is anymore. I think Toews has slowed down even more. Might get $1 million or $2 to play on a 4th line somewhere this year if he plays, but I think Ryan O'Reilly is kind of the big fish, and for that reason, I don't have him coming back to Toronto. I don't think the Leafs will be able to afford him. So I have Ryan O'Reilly getting paid $6 million for 5 years, going back to St. Louis. St. Louis being a team who, for the next couple years, would be okay with overpaying Ryan O'Reilly a little bit. I don't think it hurts them that much because I think their competitive window has closed and they're now on that retool grind, which will be another couple years until they're competitive again. And I think as we sit right now, Ryan O'Reilly is still about a $5 million player. And to me, it doesn't make sense for him to stay in Toronto. Someone's going to overpay him. I think it'll be St. Louis. They know the guy. He would be a great leader for some of the younger players coming in there as they go through their retool. And then in a few years, when he's still making a little bit too much money, I think they're okay with it because the cap has gone up another $10 million and $6 million is the new, $3.5 million. So that's what I think. This one is a little bit crazy for me because the dollar amount, AAV, is so high. Yeah. But, he is a good player. He still produces at a pretty good clip, albeit a lot of it is on the power play. The foot speed has declined, but still a good player, man. So what do you think about that deal? Going back to St. Louis.
Well, I think it's definitely possible, even with the addition of Kevin Hayes to the St. Louis Blues, but this has been rumored out there for a while that he would like to go back to St. Louis, and I'm sure that the Blues would love to have him back. I mean, he won the Conn Smythe Trophy in that 2019 Cup run, so I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that they would overpay him. It is a little bit of a drop from his $7.5 million cap hit, which of course is going to happen, but not much. He's still a good player, and I can see that. The fit's there, the familiarity and everything, and we know what we know about Doug Armstrong is that he kind of reset at the deadline, but he wants to be right back in it next season, rightly or wrongly. And, they want to be a playoff team again, and bringing back a guy that meant so much to that organization as Ryan O'Reilly. And I mean, it's no question that they weren't the same without him when they lost him. He was the captain of that team, the leader. And so I could see it, man, definitely. And I do agree that he's probably the best center available on the UFA market.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got O'Reilly going to kind of an interesting team, and kind of like St. Louis, rightly or wrongly, this team is not looking to go into a big long rebuild. They want to be competitive and make the playoffs next season. So I have O'Reilly going to the Vancouver Canucks. And yeah, I know you're laughing at this one, but look, I mean, it's out there that Vancouver is desperately looking for a third line center, and I think that he could be a perfect fit. I mean, it's a matter of whether or not O'Reilly would want to go there. I'm sure he wants to win another championship, and certainly Vancouver isn't close, but as we've seen with a team like Florida, they had the goaltender, man, who kind of who carried them. And so if Thatcher Demko can, stay healthy and get back to that number one stud goaltender that we've seen in the past, who knows? Vancouver could go on a run, and God, I hate saying that, but we know how they think, again, rightly or wrongly. So I've got O'Reilly going there on a bit of a shorter term deal. I've got him going for around $4.5 to $5 million times 3 years, going to the Vancouver Canucks. And so with the Ekman-Larsson buyout, and they're probably not going to be qualifying Ethan Bear. I mean, we'll see, but it doesn't look like they will be. They've got a little over $12 million in cap space as of right now. So you could bring in a guy like O'Reilly to fill that third line center role. Maybe you send out a guy like Connor Garland or Anthony Beauvillier, who both make a little over $4 million to give yourself some extra space, because as we know, Elias Pettersson is up in a year, and that deal is going to be massive. But I think that given that third line center need, I think O'Reilly would be a great fit in Vancouver, and the fact that they want to be competitive and be in the playoffs next year, again, rightly or wrongly, it's just a matter of, would O'Reilly be willing to go to a team like Vancouver?
Yeah, while I think it's a good fit for the team, I don't think it's a good fit for the player. I don't think he would be interested in going to Vancouver. I mean, a lot could change, who knows? And maybe they make him an offer that he can't refuse, and it's the highest offer, and he just goes to the highest bidder, or whoever gives him the most term. But I just don't see it happening, especially for $4.5 million, because I think at that price on a 3-year deal, the Leafs would probably keep him, to be honest. Because
yeah, fair enough.
At $4.5 million to be your 3C, like everybody talks about the Leafs cap situation, how they're in a bit of a squeeze. They're really not. They have a ton of money to spend this year, especially if they move Matt Murray and don't buy him out, and just move him, including a pick as a sweetener. Well, there's your 4.5 right there, and that could be Ryan O'Reilly's. So if it's that low, I think Toronto keeps him. I don't think they go over a number like 5.5, and I especially don't think they want to go term on it as well. But the reason that I thought he could get something like 6x6 is because he's currently 32. If he only gets 3 years, he's not going to be he's going to be 35, and then he's not going to be able to cash in again. He's going to have to sign a 1-year deal, 2-year deal. So I would assume the player is going to want term to secure him somewhere until the end of his career. If that's not the case, I'll be shocked, but crazier things have happened. But yeah, just to reiterate, I think if it's 4.5 times 3, the Leafs do that in a heartbeat. That's an Alex Kerfoot deal, basically. That's an inflated Alex Kerfoot deal. He was making 3.5 times 4 back when the salary cap was a couple $1 million less. So, next year it's only going up by $1 million. The following year, we're expecting around $4 million, between 4 and 5. Same thing the year after that, between 4 and 5. So over this next 3-year period, it could go up as much as $11 million. And if that's the case, you're fine if you're the Leafs to pay Ryan O'Reilly 4.5. If it's more than that and he wants term, fine, let him walk. He'll go somewhere else. Someone will overpay him, especially because he's the top center on the market right now. But yeah, so that's my thought on Vancouver. I don't know if I see it working for the player, although if you're the team, that's exactly the type of player you want, because ownership wants to compete right away. And they just lost Bo Horvat, so they need someone to fill that center depth. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I could see O'Reilly getting along really well with Rick Tocchet. I could see that being a really good relationship. But again, it's dollars. And again, I could see Vancouver being a team that would overpay for Ryan O'Reilly. We know what they've been like in free agency in the past. So, but it's a matter of dollars and term and whether or not he'd want to go there. But anyway, I like the fit for that team.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to number 4 on our list, and that's Tyler Bertuzzi, who, of course, was a great fit with the Boston Bruins after going there from the Detroit Red Wings. He's got that that snarl, that grit to his game, and can certainly produce offensively as well. And he'll be looking for a nice deal this summer as one of the top players on the free agent market. So Tyler Bertuzzi, where do you see him going, Chad?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a tough one because we know this is a player who can produce and plays with that bite, like you alluded to. But just talking about his production, 30 points in 50 games last year between Detroit and Boston. And his highest is 62 in 68 games in 2021-22 with Detroit. He's currently on a deal that pays him $4.75 for the last 2 years. And I think he'll probably get a raise, but maybe not by much because he's been a player that's been in and out of the lineup so much, especially going back to the bubble years where he wasn't able to play in Canada. So I was thinking about that a little bit. I have a feeling the player doesn't want to play in Canada for personal reasons. However, I have him going to a Canadian team just because I think the fit makes a lot of sense. And I think Bertuzzi, if that's the case, if he doesn't want to play in Canada, might be able to tolerate it for a chance to play with Connor McDavid in Edmonton. I think that fit would be a match made in heaven. How great of a fit was Evander Kane in Edmonton playing with McDavid? Adding a player like that who brings some bite and can score to give you some depth scoring in the playoffs. So to take a little bit of the load off of McDavid and Draisaitl, that is the perfect fit for me in Edmonton. And the deal I have him signing would be $5 million AAV for 3 years. So the player is only 28. Okay, that would bring him to 33. And at that point, on a 3-year deal, not a 5-year deal. I think I said that. So that would bring him to 31.
Yeah.
And at that point, you'd be betting on yourself. Playing 3 years with McDavid, if things don't go well, Connor leaves your last year and then you get flipped at the deadline or something. Or things do go well, you win a cup, Connor stays, and you re-sign in Edmonton. So I think you're betting on yourself with a 3-year deal. Bertuzzi is. And I think it makes a ton of sense. So what do you think of that one?
Yeah, well, I love the fit, first of all, and we know that Edmonton certainly does need to add another top 6 forward. We certainly expect Kyler Yamamoto, who makes just over $3 million to be dealt here at some point to give them some extra space, and Yamamoto just hasn't been able to produce in Edmonton like they had hoped. But it makes a lot of sense, man. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to a team that I really feel is close to a Stanley Cup win? They could certainly be the Stanley Cup champions in 2024. You get to go and play with the best player on the planet. And the general manager, too. Ken Holland from your days in Detroit. So I think it'd be a great fit. It's just a matter of Edmonton trying to, exercise some salary cap gymnastics in order to make that work, because they're right up against it and they're going to have to get creative. And like I said, we certainly expect Kyler Yamamoto to be moved on from here very shortly.
So there you go. There's your $3 million or whatever he makes. Free up another $2 million, and you've got Bertuzzi. Because I think like something around a $5 million times 3 years, I think that makes a ton of sense. Like I said, bet on yourself. And I'm glad you mentioned the Ken Holland connection as well. His first 2 contracts, Bertuzzi that is, were signed by Ken Holland. So there is that connection there. I just think this is a match made in heaven. I don't see him going back to Detroit. There's no chance he can re-sign in Boston. They just don't have the cap space. I think if any team in Canada, that is going to be able to do it, it would be Edmonton. I think the stars are just aligning to see Tyler Bertuzzi in Edmonton.
Oh, I love that, man. And this it kind of contradicts my pick a little bit, because I've got him going back to the Boston Bruins. We know that we know that Don Sweeney has that as a priority to re-sign him, especially with the little bit of extra space that they have after sending Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno to the Chicago Blackhawks for Alec Regula and Ian Mitchell, 2 defensemen, by the way, who Jim Montgomery is very familiar with. But it's going to be tough for the Bruins salary cap wise, and so that was the toughest exercise for me with armchair GM and cap friendly, and the fact that Boston needs a centerman, because I think we expect and anything could happen, but I think we all expect that Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci will not be back with the Boston Bruins. I mean, we'll see, but
we will see. I don't know if I would say I expect that yet. I think Patrice, I think, is a guy who, I know he's had those back issues, but he might just be able to do one more year. I don't know if it's feasible, because you'd have to pay him again. And him and Krejci both had pretty good years considering their age, and especially Krejci considering he went overseas for a couple of years and came back and was just as good. But I just when I was looking at it, you've got Bergeron and Krejci to sign, or if neither of them come back, then a center to replace those 2 guys, which is going to be tough. You can't be running, Thomas Nosek as your first line center, second line center. So, you have to figure that out. And then Bertuzzi doesn't play down the middle, so that would be tough. But then also, you have Jeremy Swayman to deal with as well. Like, are you going to move on from him? Is someone going to offer sheet him? Are you going to sign him and then move Allmark? Like, the cap situation there just freaks me out. I don't know what they're going to do, but I just don't know if Bertuzzi works. Like, what kind of contract do you have him signing there?
Well, I've got Bertuzzi at around 5 times 5 in Boston, but man, it was tough trying to do this in cap friendly. So, and this has been rumored as well, but maybe they could find a taker for a guy like Matt Grzelcyk, who makes close to $4 million at around $3.7 million approximately for another season. You could buy out Mike Riley in the final year of his $3 million deal, or just find a taker. Like he's from Illinois. Maybe you send him to Chicago for futures or whatever. But Yeah, and then I know that they would probably like to re-sign a guy like Garnet Hathaway as well, and that wouldn't be an issue. It would be pretty cheap that I think you'd be able to bring a guy like that back, probably just over $1 million. But you've got Jeremy Swayman, as you mentioned. And you've also got Trent Frederick, who had a nice season last year. I think he had 17 goals, and is a younger player and plays that Boston Bruins type of game, and so he's definitely due for a pay raise as well. So it was tough, but I was able to, make it fit. But, at the end of the day, you're left with basically nothing, a couple of $100,000 in cap space by bringing back Tyler Bertuzzi at 5x5. But who knows what they do? If Bergeron and Krejci come back, maybe they decide to move on from Linus Ullmark instead of Jeremy Swayman, given that he is younger and is considered to be the goalie of the future. This one was tough, but we've seen reports out there that Boston would really like to bring Bertuzzi back. Just don't know how they're going to do it, but I could see it ending up being around a 5x5 kind of deal. But maybe they would be able to consider, or maybe they would be able to convince him to take a bit of a cut in Boston versus what he could get out on the open market. But I like your Edmondson idea. That makes a ton of sense as well, with a nice connection there.
Yeah, so just on the Boston thing, on your cap-friendly armchair GM, who do you have playing down the middle if they bring back Bertuzzi, and who do you have in net?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. It was tough. I mean, Pavel Zacha had a good season last year and had chemistry with David Pastrnak. Now, he's not a first-line center, but you could roll with him as your first-line center between Marchand and Pastrnak. Then you've got Coyle at number 2. Trent Frederick's natural position is center, so maybe you move him to your third line center spot, and then Mark McLaughlin, who we've seen a little bit, would come in as your fourth line center. So I know that sounds a little thin down the middle, but I mean, if you want
Arizona has a deeper center core than that, man. Like there's no chance they cannot do that. If both guys can't come back, I don't see a world where they sign Bertuzzi. And if they do, and their center depth looks like that going into game 1, like they are in trouble because the Atlantic is only getting better.
Yeah. Well, and I could see Boston looking for a top line center through the trade market,
yes,
rather than going to free agency, because I think the next best option after Ryan O'Reilly would probably be JT Compher, who had a nice season last year, but again, he can also play wing. That was kind of an outlier season for him. How much would he want? All of it? So I don't know. Maybe they don't bring back Bertuzzi at all, clear some more space, and you bring in another Lindholm and Elias from Calgary. Who knows? So.
And maybe you include a guy like Swayman or Ullmark in a deal for a center, because you've got two guys who are number one goalies. It doesn't make any sense to have both of them there, because I'm sure Swayman is going to want some good money, at least as far as goalies go. So maybe they figure it out that way, but then the cap still has to work. So I don't know. It's going to be a tough offseason for the Bruins, man.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's going to be really tough for sure. But we know that they want to keep him, but it's just a matter of making it work financially. That's going to be hard. So, all right, the fifth and final player on our top 5 UFA list, and that's Alex Killorn. And Chad, as you pointed out earlier today, off the show here, that he's got the most points out of all the forwards available. A good veteran who's won a couple of Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, and every year it's like we've expected Tampa to not be able to bring back Alex Killorn, and the same was said about Andre Palat. He goes last offseason, and I just don't see a path where Tampa Bay is able to bring back Alex Killorn, who's meant so much to them over the years. So where do you have Killorn, the longtime Tampa Bay Lightning forward, going, Chad?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Andre Palat, because I see Killorn's deal looking eerily similar to that one. A guy who played for a long chunk of time in Tampa Bay, got his cups, and then they couldn't afford him. So Palat makes, I believe, $6 million now in New Jersey, and I think the same thing is going to happen to Killorn. You mentioned that he led all UFAs in scoring this year. He had 64 points. He hasn't been a 64-point player his whole career, but he's been, in and around a 50-point guy, 40-point guy. Like, he's been a good depth option, middle six player, and I think now he's turned into a really good veteran option for a team who is up and coming, who can lead the way and score some goals, very similarly to how Andre Palat was treated last offseason by the Devils, a team who was ready to compete and wanted to add a piece who could put them over the top. And well, they got to the second round. So I see a team doing following suit in a similar fashion, and I think that team could be the Detroit Red Wings. 6 times 6 is the deal that I'm looking at for Alex Killorn. I don't think he wants to leave Tampa Bay, but unless they give him an 8-year deal at like $4 million, I just don't see it happening. And I mentioned the 8-year deal because that's what Tampa's been doing. They've been giving them out like candies, and to try to keep the AAV low. I'm thinking about guys like Sergachev and Paul and those guys, but yeah. I just don't see a world where he comes back. And I think 6 times 6 in Detroit to add to that young up and coming core might be enough to get them over the hump in the Atlantic and get into the playoffs for the first time in a while. What do you think about that one?
Well, I have the exact same thing. I have Alex Killorn reuniting with Stevie Y in Detroit. I think it makes a ton of sense. Again, they're a team that is looking to improve and take the next step and try and get into the playoffs this upcoming season. They've got a shitload of cap space as well, a little over $30 million in cap space, so they can do a lot. I think that this is a great player to add to that organization. Yes, we know that he doesn't want to leave Tampa, but he's got a lot of familiarity with Yzerman, and I'm sure he would love to bring him in. I'm sure that if he was able to sign Andre Palat last season, then he certainly would have, and I'm sure he looked into it. But yeah, I've got Killorn going to Detroit 6 times 5, so just a bit shorter on term given his age, but is still a great player, and then that would leave Detroit with close to $25 million in cap space to do a lot of other things. I think they need to add another defenseman. I think that another former Lightning and Radko Gudas could potentially be a fit there. We saw Yzerman overpay for Ben Sherratt last offseason. Maybe he does the same with Gudas, and we know that they'll be looking to add another goaltender to go with Ville Husso as well. But yeah, focusing on Killorn, I've got him going to Detroit. I knew that's where you were going with this one. I think it's a perfect fit. The familiarity is there with the GM, and it would certainly help them take the next step.
For sure. Just makes too much sense to me. Like, I look at Palat, I see what happened there, and I see the New Jersey Devils where they were, and I think, okay, who's a comparable team in that situation with some cap space to send or to spend with some up and coming stars? Well, Detroit fits that bill, and I think Killorn could really help them out.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And there we have it. Your top 5 unrestricted free agents heading into NHL free agency. Again, it's a bit of a weaker class this offseason. We've heard a lot about teams. They would rather improve their rosters on the trade market rather than free agency. But it's still going to be interesting, especially the goaltender market. But there we go. That's our top 5. Let us know what you think. And again, enjoy the NHL draft on Wednesday night. It's going to be an awesome offseason in the NHL. Chad, anything more before we wrap up here?
That's pretty much everything. You mentioned a bit of a weaker UFA class. I wanted to mention that off the top, and I forgot to do so. I mean, I guess it's pretty evident, though, if a guy like Ryan O'Reilly is the number 1 center on the market. But then you look at the trade market, and there's like Elias Lindholm and, you know, everybody from Calgary, and I'm sure JT Miller's name is still out there. And, you know, so the trade market is definitely where it's at if you're trying to improve your team and not overpay. I don't want to make comparisons between this UFA class and the 2016 one, but how many times did we mention this episode that we could see a team overpaying for a player? And dude, maybe it happens. I don't know if it'll be the same as, you know, your Andrew Ladds and Louis Ericssons and whatever, but could be some overpays for some aging, slower players in this UFA class.
Yeah, I've thought about that as well. Looking back at that 2016 class, those deals look rough now, and a lot of them are expired at this point. So, a bit of a comparison is there for sure. All right, that does it for episode 176. Thanks so much for listening to this one. We're going to have another episode dropping next week, and just a heads up, after that, we will be taking a bit of a summer break. So you won't have to hear from us for a little bit, and you can just enjoy your summer. But appreciate all the support. As always, thanks for listening to this one, and we'll chat with you again next week. Enjoy your Canada Day long weekend, and before that, of course, the NHL draft on Wednesday night. Take care.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details. And don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at patreon.com/boysinthebooth.